human flourishing, it's this phrase that carries the weight of life being not just good, but genuinely worthwhile. So it's about more than just surviving. It's about thriving. It's about living our best lives. And at its core, it's the optimal development of everything that makes us well, everything that allows us to thrive, everything that makes us uniquely us, our potential, our talents, and our connections with others. But here's the fascinating thing about human flourishing. It's not a one-size-fits-all deal. Welcome, dear listeners, to Emergence Now. If this is your first episode, my name is Dhiren and I'm joined by my co-host, Nikos. How are you?
Hi. Hello.
This is Nikos. Meet Nikos, people.
This is me.
All right, before we dive in, we want to acknowledge all of you. Emergence Now recently made it to the top 10 of all global podcasts. We're so grateful to each of you for supporting the show. I mean, there are millions, 4 million to be precise, of podcasts out there. And the fact that you have made the decision to listen to this show really, really means a lot to us. So thank you. Okay, today we will be embarking on a journey into the heart of what it means to flourish as a human being. So, human flourishing, it's this phrase that carries the weight of life being not just good, but genuinely worthwhile. So it's about more than just surviving. It's about thriving. It's about living our best lives. And at its core, it's the optimal development of everything that makes us well, everything that allows us to thrive, everything that makes us uniquely us, our potential, our talents, and our connections with others. But here's the fascinating thing about human flourishing. It's not a one-size-fits-all deal. It's not a cookie-cutter concept. What lights up your path, what lights up Nikos's path, what lights up Dhiren's path to flourishing might look entirely different from someone else, right? And that's perfectly okay. There's no universal formula because the journey to flourishing, to thriving it's as diverse as the people on it, right? So think of it as a mixtape. Think of it as a mixtape. For some, it's about finding happiness, while for others, it's about unlocking their next level, their full potential. So some may seek profound meaning and purpose in their lives. And, these are the greatest hits. It's the greatest hits soundtrack of human flourishing, right? What works for you is your greatest hits. So here's the kicker. Your cultural background, your unique experiences, and even where you are in life can shape what drives your sense of what makes you flourish. What's deeply important to you today might evolve into something entirely different a week from now. Okay, maybe not a week, but a month from now or 2 months from now. And I would argue even sometimes a week. I've seen firsthand where there's certain things that allowed me to flourish on my journey. It worked today, but in the not so distant future, it stopped working. So it's this dynamic concept that encompasses psychological well-being, personal growth, positive relationships, just to name a few. So exploring these aspects can help individuals. Our endeavor today is to help the listeners truly understand the journey of leading, fulfilling, and flourishing lives. I mean, this is a big concept. So we're going to make an attempt to unlock this. So today we will be sharing insights, stories, scientific findings to provide a glimpse into the multifaceted nature of human flourishing. Nikos, how do you flourish?
Love it. That's amazing. I really love how you set the stage with that, just because we know that flourishing is just this big idea, this big concept, but it's not one size fits all. I love the analogy of a mixtape. The mixtape has a big theme to it, and I feel like that's going to always triage and roll up to your deeper purpose as an individual. But I thought we could start with just setting the stage, just because I feel like there's two separate discussions, and we'll tackle both of them. The first is, how do you flourish as an individual? And then the second is, how do we flourish as a society? And obviously there are connections between how I flourish as an individual versus how I flourish and how I collectively flourish with my family, with my friends, with the people at work, and then broader society at large. And then we can bring in different aspects of institutions and government and all of the things that basically make society function, right? So, okay, so what does it take for an individual to flourish in society? Let's look at the things that make us tick today. Do you lead a healthy lifestyle? Are you getting 3+ meals a day? How quality are those meals? Are you eating really good foods?
Drinking water?
Are you sleeping well? Drinking a lot of water, right? Hydration. So this is very ground level stuff, right? We covered a lot of this in our biohacking episode. It's not, you're not really biohacking, you're just living a good quality life, right? So then there's the psychological dynamic. You know, you have self-awareness and reflection, which is obviously like a foundational step towards personal growth. I feel like I'm flourishing if I am growing as an individual. If I recognize my own strengths, my weaknesses, the things that make me tick, like we mentioned, emotions, beliefs, motivations, then I could be better at understanding where I will succeed and where I could potentially fail, right? So doubling up on my strengths and not so much on my weaknesses. And then obviously, spiritually speaking, do I have prayer and meditation in my life? Do I have spiritual grounding such that I'm not just thinking about myself, and that I do believe in, if not a divine higher power, some higher power? And I am not nihilistic by nature and believe that the world is going to fold or fall into chaos and things like that. So just self-awareness, I would bundle that whole aspect into self-awareness and journaling, and just some spiritual annotations there. Obviously, education and continuous learning, right? So having access to these diverse sources of knowledge and lifelong learning opportunities just cultivates an adaptable and really resilient mindset. And so that's not the first time we've talked about resilience and having an optimal mindset here on this show, right? We touched on physical health. We touched on having regular exercise and adequate sleep, which are the cornerstones of physical well-being. Mental health, which I'll click into just because there's some component of that that's very important, especially if you are not mindful of your current state. So you may need a little bit more counseling or therapy or supportive communities that can nurture the right kind of mental resilience and emotional balance. Here's another good one: meaningful relationships, right? A lot of people, and I was one of them at one point, I kind of rode around my life as a lone wolf and thought that I could live on an island and do everything myself. But really building strong social connections and emotional bonds, it fosters a sense of belonging and security. And then obviously the big one, financial security. While money can't necessarily buy you happiness, it's that financial stability that alleviates stress and provides the means to pursue personal interests and these growth opportunities that we have mentioned. So the one thing I know about money, you know, I've lived with it, I've lived without it. And what I do know for sure, that it's better to have it than to not have it, just because you have one less thing to worry about, right? And then, of course, like I mentioned, it all rolls up into your purpose and passion, and identifying and pursuing one's passion and purpose really adds meaning and direction to one's life. So I would say with those foundational things, that's what it means to flourish as an individual.
Okay. So that sounds great. It's a great foundation, right? I mean, everything you touched on is absolutely, I'm going to say, essential for some, but not for all, right? So for you, if you had to pick three out of the aspects of human flourishing that are key, what are your top three?
Oof,
I know. I
tough,
only ask tough
tough one.
questions.
All right. Go with the most foundational ones, which are purpose and
Mm,
passion, self awareness and reflection, which is the spiritual foundation, and physical health. And a lot of people would put financial security as like top one. But if you don't have those three, then what can you enable with financial wealth or well being if you can't get up out of bed in the morning? Right.
mm.
So I would say those are the top three for me.
Okay, so those are the top three for you. Has it always been the top three for you? I mean, I know you
No.
mentioned that you used to be this lone wolf. You thought you could do it all on your own. And now
Yep.
you've explored and discovered the importance of social connections and bonds.
Totally. Totally.
How can someone come to the realization that something has shifted, right? Because we talk about self-awareness. What if someone is very early in their self-awareness journey and things have shifted, but they're not really able to put their finger on it? So how did you decode that? Oh, you know what? I used to be a lone wolf. Now I'm not that person anymore. Like I've shed that skin. I'm someone who now
Totally.
really values social connections.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like the shift happens once you are more fluent with internal dialogue and understanding what your peaks and valleys are. So, all of the abstract things that are very difficult to measure, how much I love someone, how much I am enjoying my experience, the taste of food, whether or not I'm depressed, all of those things that we can relate to and ascribe to things that are not meant to be measured because they're very much inclined to subjective experiences. And I would associate all of these things to energy
Mm,
and
beautiful.
frequency. And when I realized that I vibrate at a much higher frequency with my partner today and with other individuals that lift me up rather than being in my head all the time, I would say that's a perfect convergence of all three. So if I don't get a good workout in, or if I miss, let's say, 3 full days of working out, I'm already a little bit more sluggish. Or if I hadn't had sleep, or if I'm not self aware of any of those things, I could feel pretty crappy, but I'd still kind of move forward. But the vibration is the big one, right? So, do I feel like I'm radiating with a lot of this energy? Do I feel like I want to seize the day? Do I feel like I want to go and do something special? I feel like those things are very critical. And I wouldn't have realized it if I did not become self aware several years
Mm,
ago when I started doing a lot more meditation and journaling and all of those things.
yeah, beautiful. So when I think about, my foundation, the three that really stand out for me. I mean, there are a few, but I try not to get. I mean, we can only focus on so much all at once, and so for me, it's all about now. I mean, it's changed over the years, but as of today, for me, the top three that really allow me to flourish. The first is flow states, like just getting into, you can call it happiness, you can call it being centered, being grounded. I like to describe it as a flow state because that's what I'm constantly trying to optimize for. And when I say flow state, I encompass meaning and purpose into that because when I'm singularly focused on my purpose, I find that I am in those moments, I'm in flow more than I am when I'm not focused. I mean, very obvious, but a realization that's come to me in the last few years. And so in the past, I used to describe that as happiness. I want to just be happy. But what does that really mean? So I think it's more descriptive to use for me to really describe it as a flow state.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I feel like flow states are huge. That's a good one. And you're absolutely right. It is an integration of purpose and passion, physical health, and mental health. So I feel like there's a perfect Venn diagram in there when
Yeah,
you are completely in the zone because you know you're doing exactly what you need to be doing. And there's no mind there. It's just flowing through you, and you are performing at your best, and the quality of work that comes out is absolutely astute and amazing, and it's just effortless, right? You and it's almost transcendent, I would
absolutely.
say the quality of a flow state is.
I give this example a few weeks ago. I've been talking about this with friends when we talk about running specifically. So I walked out of my front door and I said, you know what? I'm going to leave Dhiren behind. I'm just going to leave Dhiren behind. He's not coming on this run with me. And within a couple minutes, I was in that state of flow. I ran my fastest 10K. Did I share this with you when I was in Yeah,
No.
I ran my fastest 10K. There was no pain, time completely dilated, and I was in that state of flow. And yeah, I mean, there was just so much chatter usually when he's with me, right? When that persona is with me. So I left him at home and it was beautiful. I mean, I'm constantly trying to, when I'm about to get into a difficult discussion and I know my persona therein has a lot of preconceived notions or biases, I'll put them aside and just try to clean the slate because the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between reality and imagine, right? And so when we make that conscious decision and when we're trying to be hyper aware of a side of us that we're now putting to the side or we're not going to be that individual, it's amazing. Anyway, the second aspect of human flourishing for me is health. I mean, health is absolutely key. And health encompasses sleep, nutrition, meditation, mindfulness. It's this whole, and sleep being a key, absolute key pillar of it. I think it all starts with sleep. When people ask me, well, what's the one thing that I can start with? I always say, if you start with sleep and you're singularly focused on that, it creates this cascade. The third is financial freedom. To me, financial freedom is in the last few years has become far more essential because then it allows me to really be purpose focused. And it allows me, it has this cascade out, right? With the flow state and health. It allows me to be purpose focused. It allows me to really be the master of my domain in terms of my time. Yeah, so those are my top three.
That's amazing. And what comes to mind, because I'd like to be careful with our words and what's going to resonate for certain people, because there are very few people that have financial freedom. There are a lot more that have financial security, but at the foundational level, that obviously becomes very important just to grow, just to do what you're going to do, right? And so there's got to be a more meaningful discussion for people because you can't go from being completely broke and on the street and barely living paycheck to paycheck to absolutely flourishing and being financially free completely, right? So I know we focus a lot on the entrepreneurs that already have that mindset and are already fairly well off, and they tend to be the alpha personalities that can get stuff done and move mountains and put a dent in the universe and all of those good things. But then when we move the discussion to aspects of more collective intelligence and society, in order to flourish, you need kind of these baseline things. So I just want to be cognizant of who we're talking to and what's required to get to the next level, obviously.
Yeah,
But totally agree
that's
with
a
you
that's a
that
great
yeah,
point.
financial freedom will definitely get us there.
Yeah, and to me, when I talk about any of these three, it really is a mindset, right? So it's not categorically like you're not constantly in a flow state. or at least I'm not constantly in a flow state. And there are weeks when I'm not able to access it. In terms of health, like 2 weeks ago, I went through this phase wherein my health took a setback. Financial freedom, there are times when my expectation is aligned with reality. And in those moments, I feel financially free, even if nothing's really changed in terms of the dashboard, right? But there are phases where I would go through certain phases wherein, I don't feel I'm financially free, right? So for me, it's a mindset more than reality, because there are times when we're coming in and out of reality based on our expectations.
Yeah, for sure. I think, when you're shaping yourself, and I think, especially from a growth perspective, you're looking at this from what you can learn, what you can do, what's motivating you. I think it always comes back down to that purpose and
Mm,
passion, just because the more aligned you are with what you're supposed to be doing and you're giving it all you got, you really feel it. And that goes back to this whole notion of frequencies, because when I am doing a task or doing something and I'm not really dialed into it and I don't feel like I'm supposed to be doing it, like the energy just isn't there, and you can't even fake it anymore because you can't waste any time. And it's an interesting dynamic once you start becoming hyper aware of what you're supposed to be doing versus I'm kind of just going through the motions and I don't want to be doing this. And ultimately you need to kind of get out of those modes because yeah, there's something else that's telling you what you should be doing,
mm.
because it's when your greatest gift meets the world's greatest need. And that's when there's that perfect semblance between your purpose and passion,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. So purpose, passion, flow state. Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, who's this psychologist who introduced actually the concept of flow, describes it as an optimal human performance. It's a state of optimal human performance. And it's that feeling that when you're fully immersed in an activity and losing track of time and experiencing this deep satisfaction, like I did when I went out on that run and I left my persona behind, achieving that flow state often leads to more creativity or higher levels of creativity, productivity, and a sense of flourishing. So it speaks to the purpose that you mentioned, right? That energy, being able to tap into that abundant energy, which we spoke about a couple of episodes ago, which is essentially what passion is all about, right? I mean, a lot of these words overlap. It's also, athletes and artists describe it as being in the zone, right? In the pocket during their work or practice. It's the perfect illustration of this concept.
That's right. Yeah, I studied flow a lot when I was writing my book, just because when you are creative and you don't need to do anything else and you are just so in the moment that everything is flowing through you, that's when you have these transcendent experiences. But I do like that you brought that up, because flourishing is being in that flow state as often as possible. And it's funny because you don't need, I'll challenge what you said earlier just a little bit, just because you can achieve that flow state without having financial independence or financial
Absolutely.
freedom, right? The surfers that are, almost living in their vans, but experiencing that flow state every single day and they're perfectly happy. You have the advanced meditators who could barely eat, but yet they're in a pure meditative flow state almost 20 hours a day. And some have even said that they go without eating for weeks and they could spend months in a cave and be in this optimal state. What's your comment on that? Is that a level of flourishing? It's not a level of flourishing in terms of what we know in the Western world, but that is flourishing in terms of the mental foundation and the spirituality, perhaps, right? Is there a dichotomy there?
Hey there. We're taking a quick break from the show to let you know that if you'd like to invite Dhiren or Nikos to speak at your next event on topics ranging from emergence and the inner game to the future of AI, we've got you covered. Simply email us at info@emergencenowpod.com. Once again, that's info@emergencenowpod.com. Now, let's dive back to the show.
Absolutely. I mean, that's such a great point, right? Because Like, let's talk about those surfers, right? I believe those surfers, I've never asked any of the surf dudes this question, but if you were to ask them, do you feel financially free? I believe the answer would be yes. They're doing what they
Right.
love, right? They're they're
Absolutely.
working on their
Yeah.
craft and they have exactly what they need. They don't know any better than that, right? Like going back to what you alluded to earlier, the paycheck to paycheck, that's what they know. They don't have a different model of the world. So it really then comes down to, where does expectation meet reality? If this is what I expect and this is what, I'm conditioned to believe works for me and allows me to thrive and flourish, then you have it, right? You have that
That's right.
freedom because you're able to do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. Ultimately, you're making that choice that this is important to me. And freedom basically then becomes a state of mind. As I said, it's really a
Or
mindset.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Or not important to me.
Or not.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting when you said before you left on that run and started beating your own PTs and or PRs rather, you left Dhiren
Mm.
behind. And so I think that's like a micro level view of certain things that you need to do as an individual to achieve growth. Like the Nikos, the partier, and the guy that was out all night and doing those types of things because I valued those things back in the day, or somebody that just obsesses about money all the time, or just you got to leave those bags behind. And you mentioned this in a previous episode as well. In order to get to that new state, you need to shed that skin and you need to be somebody else in order to get there. So I just wanted to make that observation that there's kind of like a micro macro thing going on, that there's like a fractal pattern that you associate when you leave for that run at a much larger scale. In order to flourish, perhaps you need to leave your old self behind or an aspect of yourself behind at some
Yeah.
point and let that person go.
Absolutely. It's shedding. Yeah. And that's why, I asked you, when was the shift, right? I mean, human flourishing, it may sound like it's a philosophy, but there's actually a science behind it. And the science shows that one of the key concepts around, or key components to human flourishing, is autonomy, referring to the freedom of self determination. Basically, individuals, people, the surf guys, the surf dudes, who basically make choices which are aligned to their values and their interests, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
A lot of the science and the philosophy show that one of the key components to human flourishing is autonomy, is one of those pillars to human well-being. And autonomy plays a vital role in promoting all aspects of what we talk about, right? From happiness to life satisfactions. I mean, when I have autonomy to pursue my purpose and make choices that are aligned with my values, I'm more likely to experience a sense of freedom, right? I'm more likely
Definitely.
to experience a sense of fulfillment. And to a certain extent, maybe even health, because, that self awareness strikes in. So it's really about striking this balance between autonomy and what is really truly important to us. Because when there's an alignment in that, we just feel a lot more content, right? We feel that there are
Definitely.
certain aspects of our life that's flourishing, maybe even holistically.
Do most people feel that autonomy though, or that sense of agency? I like the word agency. Do you feel like it seems to me that in this day and age, we are accountable to so many things, people, whether they be institutions, systems, you have bills to pay. It's that whole notion that death of a thousand cuts, death by a thousand cuts, right? And just feeling like you are burdened by so many different things. And it's just hard for people to essentially live a life of full agency and autonomy when all of these things seem to be holding them down, right? On the same sense, like you have to think about flourishing in terms of being able to overcome a lot of those challenges that they have on a day-to-day basis. And so I wonder how many people feel this way. The entrepreneur mindset, of course, is about that freedom. It's about that sense of self and it's about that growth. But I wonder if people just don't feel that way because they're either oppressed or they have too many bills or they have too many mouths to feed or their health is preventing them from doing just normal things, or they have a mental state in which they feel like they not all is well and they have so many burdens, right? So how could you
Yeah.
feel that sense of freedom? You are entrapped and overwhelmed and stifled by all of these aspects of
Yeah.
life.
That's a big question. Heavy. I felt it. But that's such a great question. It's a beautiful question. In my coaching practice, I do see a lot of external factors that influence agency and autonomy or the dissolution of agency. And one of the patterns, one of the common denominators that I find, at least for people listening to this show, and challenge me on this if you feel that it's meant to be challenged. It's this
Sure.
notion that, when we bring things in, right, these commitments, these obligations, yes, there are fundamental things in life that we have to do, right? Responsibilities. And then there's the layer on top of that. I find it's the layer on top of that really tips people over the edge. And what I mean by that is, because there's certain things in our life right now that we feel could be better. We want more, right? So again, happiness is when my expectation is not meeting reality, right? Because if my expectation is constantly meeting reality, then I'm happy, right? Because I want more, I want to do more, I want to make more, I want more, more, more. Because I want more, now I'm making commitments, taking on more tasks, more projects, more obligation, because I have this idea that by doing that, I'm going to be able to be happier because at that point, my expectation will meet reality. So I think a lot of what you spoke about, we bring on to ourselves to a certain extent, I mean,
Yeah.
I think, a great characterization of this is, remember that movie, Pursuit of Happiness? Yeah,
Yeah.
played by
Yeah.
Will Smith. He goes from being
Will Smith.
homeless and he's struggling to
Right.
make ends meet. He just wanted to make ends meet, right? To becoming, going from homeless to, I think, becoming a successful stockbroker, right? And provider for
Sure.
his family. But his resilience, his determination, this unwavering pursuit to have a better life exemplified the human capacity for flourishing even in the face of adversity. But for him, he just wanted to provide, right? And so that was his focus. A lot of people, and I'm generalizing here, but at least speaking for myself, when I look at times when I was not happy, right, it was because my expectation was far greater than where reality was, right? And I took on
Yeah.
more, right? I took on more obligation, more projects, more startups, more businesses, more investments, right? And that created this feeling of stress, anxiety, overwhelm, borderline depression, right?
No, that's a very good point. I feel like we make most of this stuff up, and most of the stress, especially if you're very successful, you make it up yourself because it's a construct of the mind, and you keep seeking things that are out there when really you need to just be better aligned with yourself and fix things that are in here, right? And not to get too woo woo about it,
No, let's
but
do it.
the mind the mind is really the problem here, right? Because you keep looking at external factors and what you see on your feed on Instagram and these influencers on private jets and just this whole notion of what it means to be successful, and you want those things and they're material, and you want money and you want these nice houses and all of those things, when really flourishing, I would really argue that guy in the cave had it right. It's like, if you are in a perfect state of nirvana, that is flourishing, like complete peace, zero suffering. You're probably not suffering. You're rarely hungry. And once you reach those advanced states of consciousness, I would say that you are
Beautiful.
flourishing. And that's a very controversial thing to say for somebody in the
Is
Western
it?
world. But I mean, a lot of people don't think that living in a cave and meditating all day is any, by far stretch of the imagination, a good
But when you
life,
say,
right? Most people,
sorry, I'm just going to push back. When you say living in a cave, is that a metaphor? Is that a metaphor for, just.
no, I'm really
Oh,
talking about a
okay.
yogi living in a
Okay.
cave.
Because what I took from that is, just living an
Yeah.
essential life, right? Like just a simple,
Yeah.
okay, you know what? Do I really need
Sure.
that? Do
Yes.
I want to
Yeah.
give what
Totally.
it's going to take to get that, to bring that into my life? This is what it's going to take. Do I really want
Totally.
that? No, I don't. Right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say there's two sides of it, right? There's definitely the psychological, spiritual aspect of it that sometimes is in conflict with very much the external factors of what we mean in terms of flourishing, right? So having all of your needs met and having that kind of independence and really being able to be in flow state the whole time, and flourishing to the degree in which you're making an impact and changing the world as an entrepreneur because you have all of those
Yeah.
tools, right? But it's got to be a little bit of both.
That's true. It is. And I really don't like the word balance, but yeah, it's basically striking that equilibrium, which is key. You know, one of my favorite speeches, and I'm sure you've seen this, Jim Carrey, he gets up to give a speech because he just won his third Emmy, right? And he gets up and he says, "Hello, my name is Jim Carrey. I am a two-time Emmy winner." And then he says, "Last night I dreamt of going to sleep as Jim Carrey, two-time Emmy winner, but I was dreaming to be Jim Carrey, three-time Emmy winner. Then I will be enough." And there was this really uncomfortable laugh from the crowd because it's so true. It's like, well, what do you really want? And are you willing to give what it takes to get that? And most of the time,
Yeah.
we want certain things. And this goes to, so flourishing happens in, so science and research around human flourishing shows that there's a high concentration of flourishing taking place in these blue zones. So regions basically around the world that are known for their high concentrations of people who have lived over 100. And,
Yeah.
there have been a few researchers that have studied these communities to uncover basically the secrets to longevity and well-being. What are the common factors in these blue zones? And one of them is what you mentioned earlier, social connections, a sense of purpose, a plant-based diet, regular physical activity, right?
Okay.
So these
Okay.
stories are so great because they offer us these insights to a certain lifestyle and cultural factors that are contributing to this lifestyle. And it's that sense of community. So when I see people or when I look at my journey, the moment I started surrounding myself with people who are aligned with certain values that I share, maybe it's never a complete overlap, but there's a high level or high degree of similarity in terms of vision, purpose, values. I found that, it actually allowed me to flourish even more. So it goes to that social connections that you mentioned. But social connections,
Definitely.
is a slippery slope because it can go the other way, right? Where you're surrounded with people who are not really aligned with your values, who are pushing really hard, and their expectation never meets reality, right? Yeah.
Totally.
And that's contagious.
Yeah, that is super interesting. It's always going to be based on the people that you're with, right? And it's going to be the community that you surround yourself with And nobody wants to be around negative Nancys. Everybody wants to be around positive, really energizing type of people. So obviously, from that perspective, you elevate at a much higher level when, and you're vibrating at a much higher level when people are just there to lift you up. And that goes without saying around having a good, solid family. And then I think we could just tie this back now to really what it takes to cultivate that growth, right? Are you using force to build your empire, or are you planting seeds within a garden that start to sprout the more sunshine and water that you give it, right? Is this a backyard of growth and color and inspiration, or are you kind of forcing your way into things? So I want to highlight that, and also definitely want to look at the connections that people have between themselves, the journaling, the people that are in their lives. And obviously, like you had mentioned, relationships are very, very important here, just because having, something as simple as a life partner to grow with you as an individual and to help you manifest and materialize all of the things that you want. So I'll turn it back to you, Dhiren. What are the ultimate drivers? Do we just go back to the foundations here, right? Like, what are the advanced states of flourishing here? So back to the basics. Now let's go to the advanced states. Like, what would you go back to? Is it all passion, purpose, and mindset? How do you optimize that flow? And what can you do every day to flourish as an individual?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on several of them. And the one that you touched on that really resonates with me, and what I've seen to be really that X factor, that catalyst, the fuel on the rocket for many people, is meaning and purpose. It's this universal need, right, that we all have. And some of us may not even be aware of it yet, but at some point you will find the importance of meaning and purpose. Now, many individuals are driven by this deep-seated need to find meaning and purpose in their life. So the drive can lead people to engage in activities that align with their values and contribute to a greater sense of significance. So really just being aware and objective with, why are we doing what we're doing? Like, is this really aligned with our values? And at least for me, in the past, a lot of what I was doing was not aligned with my values. I had this external validation slot machine that I was doing it for. And I think now the stakes are even higher with, as you alluded to earlier, with social media, right? It can be really, really challenging to really stay focused on, and singularly focused on, okay, these are my values. This is what gives my life meaning. And most of my energy and time will go to that. And I mean, it's very easy to say not being distracted. I mean, it's a journey, right? But yeah, I think to me, to answer your question, that's fundamental. Meaning and purpose is fundamental to human flourishing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we don't, I was just going to say, people say, well, I need to find my purpose, right? It's that perennial question, like finding purpose. Like, where do you find it? Like, I just haven't found my purpose. But I truly believe now, and we should do an episode on this, where we don't find our purpose finds us.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the more that we chase things externally, and the more that of course you can admire individuals, but it tends to be constructed, right? Like, a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs, you want to be kind of like that big mogul or that big shot or own a hedge fund, and it's usually tied to some kind of monetary value, again, some kind of construct. Nobody ever talks about, I want to be that guy that I see on the wave that has no worries at all, because all he's worried about is what his next move is going to be, because he's so dialed into that moment, right? Nobody says that. But that person has found their purpose because they may be living in a van or meditating in and using kind of like that simple lifestyle. But again, they've optimized that flow state.
Yeah.
And so I think the key takeaway for me here is being incredibly cognizant with what we value as individuals and almost separating the internal state of flourishing with the external metrics that we all associate with flourishing. And I even think it's worth going into another episode on what it means for a society to flourish as opposed to just an individual.
Yeah, beautiful. So as we wrap up this conversation on human flourishing, I want to leave the listeners with a thought that's worth carrying forward. Remember that, the journey toward flourishing is not a destination. It's cliche, but it's a lifelong adventure. It's an adventure. It's not even a journey. It's an adventure, right? Life will always throw its challenges, its opportunities your way, sometimes all together. But what brings us fulfillment and joy might evolve over time. It has for me, it has for you, Nikos. And I believe that it's going to happen for everyone. But embracing change, again, this goes back to episode 5, biohacking, right? Embracing change, staying curious, keeping that spirit of exploration and really understanding what really makes my heart sing, right? So ultimately, the path to human flourishing is unique and it's a beautiful ongoing process of self-discovery and growth. So we should always drive ourselves forward and we should dream big. We should be resilient in the face of adversity and always strive. But at the same time, ask ourselves, are we really doing this because it's aligned with our values? Or is there something, someone in our external environment that's really motivating us to drive it? Because that external driver is not sustainable. We're going to constantly need that external funding in order for us to get to what it is we're trying to get to or to achieve what we're trying to achieve. And if that's what makes us flourish and the motivation is coming externally, then, we're going to find ourselves in moments wherein we don't feel like we're flourishing. So what I want to leave the listeners with is, how can you bring that in? How can you self-fund what makes you flourish? So as you continue on this journey, you may find happiness, meaning, and well-being, and you may look at life as a testament to this incredible potential of the human spirit. That's when you know that it's inherent, it's internal, and it's sustainable. Before we wrap up, I want to mention, you said about a cave. You said going into a cave. Now, if the cave is anything like your cave, Nikos, your pad, then I think that's a pretty nice cave. I'll take that cave.
Cave.
I'll take that cave. Thank you for joining us today. And remember, your pursuit of human flourishing is remarkable and inspiring. And keep thriving, keep flourishing, and keep being the wonderful humans that you are. That's all for us in this episode of Emergence Now. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode. Ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Emergence Now, where we explore the emerging trends, technologies, and ideas that are shaping our world today for you to discover yourself. We hope you have enjoyed this episode and gained valuable insights that you can apply in your own life. If you want to stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media, where we share additional content, engage with our community, and keep the conversation going. Thank you for listening to Emergence Now, and we hope you will join us for the next episode.